Paul there said Cpdp is a rock and roll experience, and we are now the half of Cpdp. I don't know whether you already had your rock and roll experience. If you didn't, this is your opportunity to have a rock and roll experience, because we have a very rock and roll panel with some changes in the lineup. Rocco will explain and justify everything. And so I'm very happy to see you, very happy to be here at this panel. It's the 4th year that we have at Cpdp a panel on issues related to gender, data protection and privacy. And this is possible thanks to the support and commitment of the managing director of Cpdp, which is Rosamunde van Brakel, who's not here probably because she's managing direction somewhere, but I say hi to Rosamunde, and thank you very much to her for allowing this to happen. Because it's the 4th year, I've been learning with experience, and I have 4 disclaimers for this panel. The first disclaimer is that this is a panel about gender, but it's not that we are obliged to discuss only gender or all the time about gender. We can discuss what we want, any other relevant dimensions. Second disclaimer is not because we have this panel about gender that you cannot think about gender issues in other panels and raise questions in other panels. Third disclaimer is not because we have this panel here that we cannot think and discuss gender issues in other places and events during the year. We can also do this. And the fourth disclaimer related to this one is that, of course, in this small panel, we cannot discuss all the things that would be relevant to be discussed. I think there are many issues. We have decided to focus this year on this notion of gender data bodies. We don't know exactly what are gender data bodies. For me, it's about thinking about the relation between gender and data and bodies. How is our data, the data that is out there, mediated through our bodies? How are our bodies mediated through data? And these are big questions that I think we can probably not solve, but we can think about them. Now, while you think about them, because we really want also you to think about all this, I will tell a very short anecdote that is unrelated, but I think it's a fun anecdote. And I've been told I can tell this anecdote on the condition that it's anonymized. So I will anonymize my anecdote. To this, this can only work if you recognize somebody or something. In my anonymized anecdote, you cannot show you recognize something, because otherwise you will kill the anonymization. Okay, Rocco? Okay, for me. Okay, so my little anecdote is about an institution that funds research in a country not very far away from here, that I will not disclose. And this research institution funds like events, workshops, things. And they wanted to fund an event on algorithms and things. And because they are very good research institution, they have a gender policy. And actually, before the event is taking place, they say, well, give us the list of the participants so we can check that everything is in order, because we have this gender policy thing. So the organizers, presumably people with some competence, gave the list of the people, and they say, the research institution say, we see a problem here. We see you have too many women. And we have a gender policy. And they say, well, is this really a problem for the gender policy? They say, yeah, well, it's a problem for the gender policy, but it's also a problem because of the substance. Because you are dealing with algorithms, and that's a technological issue. Okay? So this is the world, the planet where we live in. This is still, it was last year, okay, but so I think we have subject themes for many panels in the following editions. But just to wake you up. And now I introduce the moderator of this session. It's Rocco Bellanova from the University of Amsterdam. He's a great friend of Cpdp. He's one of my favorite co-authors. We have been working on the disappearance of bodies, on obscenity, on many issues that I don't know why we work on this, but we have been writing many things on data politics, data protection politics. So Rocco, please.
First of all, I would like to thank Cpdp and Gloria for organizing this panel, and I know that is an important commitment and is a key panel at Cpdp. So for me, it's really an honor to act as a moderator of this panel. It's kind of a patriarchal role, because I will be the one telling them to stop speaking when they speak too much, but the goal is to have, at the beginning, shorter presentations so that we have more time to discuss with the audience. So please do not hesitate to intervene. We'll just have a first round, and then I will open the floor, and I'm open to taking as many interventions as possible from you. I would like to thank you again, our speakers, and I'll briefly introduce them in order of their presentation. We start with Grégoire Marino, Head of Trust and Safety at Clue, a period tracking and fertility app. Then we will hear from Anna Brandusescu, a research and policy officer at the World Web Foundation. And our third speaker will have been Valentina Hvale Pellizzer from the Association of Progressive Communication, but unfortunately she cannot join us for personal reason, and she excused herself. So we welcome and thank Stefania Milan, Associate Professor of New Media and Digital Culture at the University of Amsterdam. And thank you, Stefania, because you accepted to participate last minute to this panel, but I'm pretty sure that you have very, very interesting things to contribute to. And finally, we are waiting for our fourth speaker, Seeta Peña Gangadharan. She's assistant professor at the Department of Media and Communication of the London School of Economics, and she's currently trapped in a delayed train somewhere in Europe, and hopefully she will join us for the second half of the panel. So if she will join us later, we will start with another short presentation from her. But now, no more introduction. We'll just start, and thank you very much. Grégoire, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you both, and yeah, it's an honor for me to represent my company here at this year's Cpdp. So my name is Grégoire Marino, I'm Trust and Safety Manager at CLU, and I would like to introduce you to the work of my great colleagues. So at CLU we have the ambition to revolutionize female health with data. So if you could go to the next slide. Quickly, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about who we are. So next slide, please. At CLU, our vision is to help people all around the world benefit from insights into female health. As you all know, women have been left out of medical research. Menstrual health is an underfunding sector of medical research. And in our societies, there is still a lot of taboos surrounding women's period and menstrual health cycle in general. So at CLU, we believe that we can change this and improve the situation with the help of data that our users are tracking via our app. So next slide, please. So that's CLU. CLU is a period tracker, so more accurately, a menstrual cycle tracking app. It offers personalized health insights and personalized predictions. So the way it works is that when you start using CLU, you enter a few informations about your cycle and about your period, and then after it's gonna display this cycle and tell you more about your cycle. And then after, what you can do is track, and the more you track, the more accurate the algorithm becomes. So, for example, CLU will tell you when your next period is about to start, when you are most likely to ovulate, or when you may feel the symptoms of the premenstrual syndrome, so pain, headaches, nervosity, or anxiety. So, as I said, the more a user tracks, the higher the quality of our predictions become, because our algorithm learns and refines itself day after day. In the future, we hope to be capable of detecting health conditions such as PCOS or endometriosis with our technology. Next slide, please. So CLU has been founded in 2013 by Ida Tin. And Ida, our CEO, she's a really passionate advocate for female health. She came up with the idea of CLU while traveling and thinking of the potential of new technologies for women all around the world, especially in areas where women's health is really underserved. And our intuition was a good one. Now we have more than 5 million users all around the world. We are available in 15 languages, and we are 50 people working all together in our office in Berlin. So another really important point for us is that we are really based on science and data. So it's really the core of the company. We have data science, medical researcher, and software engineering. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about what you can track on CLU. There are lots of tracking categories in CLU. They've been selected because there are regular occurrences during a cycle, or because they can have an impact on a user's cycle or on a user's well-being. So you can track your level of sleep, your level of energy, your sexual activity, your cervical fluid, the type of hair you have during your cycle. All of this can actually become quite powerful information into giving you the best insight for your health. So next slide, please. Tracking, so now the question that you might ask yourself is why tracking this information and giving all this information to an app? So tracking brings a lot of benefit to our users. It helps responding to 3 basic but extremely important questions. So next slide, please. The first one is, am I typical or am I normal? Second one is, am I healthy? And the third one is, what is about to happen in my cycle? So to respond to the question, am I normal? We compare cycles of all our users together, and we look for similarities and differences between our users. We used various statistical models, and by doing this, we've also discovered a lot of very interesting user segments. Some of our users track typical menstrual cycle data points, for example, energy levels or sexual activity. Some other tracks only positive symptoms, so for example when they are happy, so these are the people that see the glass half full. Some other track their pains and when they don't feel good, so those people see the glass half empty. Some track their pill intake, so they really rely on Clue to remind them when they have to take their pill. And some other mostly use Clue to track their sexual activity. This type of data points are really interesting because from the question, I am normal, comes the question, well, am I healthy? That's also really a very important question for us, and this is where we believe Clue can make a difference in the well-being of our users. And here we have a few success stories that I'd like to highlight, where a couple of users detected cancerous tumors after going to the doctor based on a recommendation made by Clue. For example, we had this user, she's a mother of 4, 52, and she's been having irregular cycles. This is part of her life, so she was not too worried about it because she knows she is not typical. That being said, by using Clue and tracking her cycle regularly, Clue told her, we believe that something's off in your cycle and we would recommend you to go and check out your doctor. And she ended up going to her doctor, and after going to take some tests, she had cancerous tumors. They saw it in advance, and she's now cured, and she's been sending an email of love to the team, and this was quite a moment in the company when we received this long email telling us that, yeah, the product we've built actually saved her life. And we've had a few of these success stories, and it's really heartwarming for a team when you actually work on something that benefits to everyone in the world. Finally, the other question that we are asking ourselves is what is about to happen? This is where we are currently putting a lot of effort because the model is based on information about your previous cycle. So it's really important for users to actually track regularly and track accurately about their symptoms. In any case, with Clue, our users collectively built one of the biggest data sets in the history of female health. Next slide, please. Because, more than 2 billion data points have been tracked with Clue, and that's more than 50 million cycles. So that's just an incredibly large data set. And the whole point of building such a data set is that we can use it for a good purpose, and that's the purpose of building more knowledge around female health. And we don't do this on our own. Next slide, please. And another one. We don't do it on our own, we do it with leading research institutes and universities. So we've been partnering with Stanford. With Stanford, we've been reproducing some important studies on the characteristics of menstrual cycle with our really large data set. So because the order of magnitude between the previous studies and our study is so big, they can confirm or infirm some of the previous studies that they've been working for. So it's really useful for them. With Columbia, we're working on a study on the effect of the age of menarche, which is the age when a person gets the first period, and the likelihood that they will develop breast cancer in future. Apparently, there is a correlation between the age of the users when they get the first period and the possibility that they get cancer. The younger a user has the foreplay, the more likely they can have breast cancer. So these are the current research that are being done with Columbia University. With Oxford, we looked at the relationship between sexually transmitted infection and the premenstrual syndrome, because there is some evidence that some of the PMS syndromes are triggered by inflammation. So that could lead to this PMS syndrome being used to diagnose this infection. So that could really have an interesting impact, and we could tell our users early whether or not they may have an STI. And this year, we are about to announce publicly 3 new partnerships, one again with Columbia, with the aim of building brand new machine learning algorithms to detect new insights about health and behavior around menstrual cycle. Okay, and so I'm gonna have to cut that a bit. Okay, then I would like to go to my next slide. Because basically, Clue, it's not just an app, it's also a website. And we have this mission of educating our users and the world about menstrual health. And we put a lot of effort in this, giving this educational content, and it's shared via our newsletter and our website. The idea here is that we want to provide peace of mind, because usually when you go on a website, if you have pain, the first thing you're going to read is, oh, the internet's telling you you've got cancer or something. So what we want to do is to avoid these moments and to give the right information that has been fact-checked and scientifically accurate. The content is also empathetic, and we want to make sure that users feel comfortable knowing about their health. And maybe let's go to the next slide. So I would like quickly to talk about some of the challenges that we are facing with Clue. Next slide, please. So one of my personal biggest challenge at Clue is data privacy and legal compliance. The data we collect is called sensitive personal data. So it must be safely stored and encrypted. We must make sure that our third-party partners are rigorous. And we need to ensure that we always are compliant with the legal regulation. And obviously, the GDPR is a massive piece of my work right now. And here I'd like to just make an open call. Anyone that has interesting experience about children consent, please come talk to me after, because this is something we are currently dealing with. Finally, another one is gender accessibility, because we want all our content to be accessible for everybody, regardless of their sexual orientation and their sexual preferences. And that's a constant dialogue within the company and our users. Finally, data quality, as I mentioned, because we need good data to provide good insights. And finally, what is always on our mind is we need to maintain trust with our users. So the product has to work and the communication has to be right. And this is it.
Thank you very much, Grégoire. Before moving to Anna, I would like to welcome Seeta. Thank you for being here. So we'll have all the presentation in a row now. Anna.
Thank you for having me here today. I'm Anna Brandusescu, and I work for the World Wide Web Foundation on research and policy. And yeah, if I could have my slide up, I won't be talking about it for a minute, but that would be great. Thank you. So at the Web Foundation, I work on our Women's Rights Online program, which is led by my colleagues, Nanjira Sempuli and Ingrid Brudvig. So we work with 17 partners in the Global South and low and middle income countries in different regions, so across Asia, MENA, Africa, and Latin America. And our research was primarily conducted across 10 cities in 2015, which I'll talk about more in discussion. This was done by our partners, primarily in urban areas. So from that, we put together scorecards that were created, and they're called the Digital Gender Audit Gap. So for online content, our research showed that seeking out information on sexual and reproductive health is key. And really, we identified 5 areas. So we looked at online safety, internet access and women's empowerment, affordability, digital skills and education, and relevant content and services. So across all of those, areas, all of them scored less than 5 out of 10, or just 5 out of 10, which was affordability. And for online safety, I think it's notable to say that the web is still not a safe space for women. So based on that research from 2015, we decided to put together a policy framework. So we're calling on countries to react, and that's really to close the gender digital divide in access and also use. Because we know that these issues are interlinked, and women can't just be seen as data commodities. They're entitled to agency in shaping, designing, and auditing data products, which are increasingly driving our digital experiences. So our WRO partners in each of the 10 countries we worked on have developed national action plans, setting 5 context-specific steps that they will take on this year in 2018. And it's really about react, so rights. What does that mean? Well, it's about protecting and enhancing everyone's rights, especially the rights of women, making the web a safer space, and protecting the fundamental rights, so looking at freedom of speech and privacy, but also looking at policy, legislative, and regulatory processes that uphold these digital rights. It's also about education, so it's about equipping everyone, again, especially women, with the skills needed to access and use the web in an effective way for them. As we all know, education is key and it's a powerful tool, and that's why digital literacy and know-how, which are often seen as a hindrance still, are important to circumvent and to enhance. So this is why looking at products and series that are designed to benefit women is critical. What do we mean by that? Well, it's really about simplifying terms of services and consent. And it's also about digital skills incorporation in primary and secondary school curricula in every country, not just global south countries. It's also about incorporating this in higher and tertiary education. Again, all of these target especially at girls and women. Third, it's about access. So it's about delivering affordable or even free access to an open web. So we need to move away from digital farms where the unconnected are being connected by initiatives that really just have browsing feeds, data systems which are meant for advertising, and move away from, let's say, just having the internet as Facebook and free basics to an open web for all. And there's also, of course, the affordability challenges, especially for women. As we know, women earn less than men, and there's an increased cost for them to connect. And our Alliance for the Affordable Internet has a 1 for 2 affordability target, which is really having 1 gigabyte per month that costs less than 2% of someone's monthly income. So this hasn't been quite met yet, but it is an important thing to take forward and focus on having that kind of higher standard on affordability, because in some countries it's even 15 or 20% of a woman's monthly income to access the web. So that needs to reduce drastically. But in the meantime, we need also public access programs that are available in public spaces that women can use and access the web. And fourth, content. So it's really about ensuring relevant and empowering content for women that is available and used. So we do have cases of where censorship presents a challenge, such as Indonesia and Egypt, which I'll also discuss more later, that needs to be overcome. In terms of content, it needs to be valuable and empowering, or it just simply won't be used. And governments need to also ensure that their content is available and accessible to women, so it's not just the private sector or third-party providers or so on that need to take care of this and manage it. So the government needs to put out information on sexual and reproductive health, on legal rights, and digital financial services in local languages. And fifth, targets. So that's really about setting and measuring concrete gender equity targets, and it's about responsibility and accountability, I would say. So the role of governments here plays to connect people, especially women and girls. It's important to know by when, how do they decide to have deadlines or milestones, and how much will it actually cost. This is about building on and creating policy that will one day turn into legislation and regulation that addresses, for example, data protection bills in a country. It's also about linking to global initiatives like the Sustainable Development Goals. But nonetheless, the GDPR is still important because what happens in the EU and beyond the EU and the US at a regulatory level does impact how global South countries shape their laws and regulations. So that is an important note to make. Right now we're working on research on personal data protection in Nigeria. Right now there's no data privacy act in the country, so the GDPR was used to see what points out of that, what provisions would be effective or valuable for Nigeria to take on in law. So it is important. And on another note, the GDPR will also influence how startups and companies in other regions of the world doing business in the EU or interacting with EU citizens and beyond, that will affect the way they use their data. So yeah, that's just me. I'm keeping it short.
Wow. Thank you very much for. You still have a lot of time.
I have a lot of time. Okay,
if
so
you want to add something more.
Yeah, sure. I'll talk a little bit about the research specifically more to this this section and like the web and its sexuality, I suppose. So what we found in our research is that so again, June to August 2015, we conducted interviews, almost 9,000 of them, across 10 cities. So our partners worked on this and led this work. And we found that for women with internet access, under a quarter have a search for sexual and reproductive health information on the web only. And in some cities like Lagos and Bogota, a large proportion of women have never sought information on sexual or legal rights anywhere, both online and offline. Which, again, it's a cultural shift that needs to happen, but it's also about the way we interact with our space offline and online and how we transcend those spaces that is important to capture. So the existing threats to online privacy definitely hinder this education further, or just the rights and achieving empowerment. It's very limited. It's limiting the online information that's already there that really prevent women from accessing information on rights, and this goes beyond anything related to reproductive health or sexual health towards financial services and so on. So in terms of our indicator on the availability of sexual and reproductive health information online, our scoring criteria, which is really our recommendations, and they are high, but they're very important, are really about having government, CSOs, and private service providers make available information on reproductive sexual rights and services in local languages with information that is factual, objective, uncensored, and presented in a user-friendly, interactive format, with no technical or medical terms that are hard to understand. So I'm not saying not to have science, but please have an FAQ section or question submission form so people can interact with the content that you're presenting to them. And it's also about having specific information on contraception and abortion, on HIV and AIDS prevention, counseling, testing, treatment, sexual well-being, and sexual violence as well. And it's also about having content that is not just accessible, so that must be accessible, not just available. So in terms of censoring, though, that's still very much a problem. So like I mentioned a few minutes ago, in Indonesia, information on sexuality and sexual health is often centered under their pornographic law. So how do you change legislature to make sure that women do become educated and have access to this information, and it doesn't look upon as either illegal or a taboo? And furthermore, in Egypt, the LGBT community and around content on sexuality in terms of dealing with police surveillance of online dating sites that exist, which also ended up leading to arrests. And right now we do have our partner in the country, Tadwing's Gender Research, who are conducting digital security trainings to circumvent that.
Thank you very much. Seeta, you were able to join us finally. We welcome you, and maybe you want to go with your presentation.
For the technician guy. Hello. So it's the person who was at the train. We changed a little bit the things.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. Apologies for being late, and just want to say that it's a bit of a sad story why I'm late. Somebody died on the tracks and that delayed the train from London to Brussels for quite some time. So I'm going to talk about a project that I co-lead with 4 other women called the Our Data Bodies Project. And this is a project that isn't expressly framed in a feminist tradition. Though we're predominantly women of color, as you can see from that slide above, and we're all women-run. Our name speaks to not our bodies ourselves, as is often mistakenly attributed to us, which is a seminal feminist book that was popular in the United States. But we actually take our name from 1990s hip-hop. Anybody raise your hand if you know who ODB is? All right, 2 people. Oh, 3. Great, awesome. Okay. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this project and thinking about this name throughout the presentation. So what do we mean when we talk about our data bodies? We have kind of 3 other bits of detail that I want to share with you as context. So we are interested in the impacts of data-driven systems and data collection or data rights on members of marginalized communities in the United States. We're working in the cities of Detroit, Los Angeles, and Charlotte, North Carolina. In each of these cities, we are working in extremely poor to working poor neighborhoods. And we have adopted a participatory design. It's, I think, maybe, so it's maybe not the most conventional participatory action research design, but essentially what we've done is all of us have been organizers, but 2 of us are academics or employed as academics, and 3 of us are actually working and making a living as community organizers. So we didn't hire graduate research assistants, we hired community organizers that are based in their communities. And once this project is finished, Tawana Petty, Tamika Lewis, and Mariela Saba will all go back and continue to work in their communities, in many cases continuing to work on these issues. We have a target of 150 in-depth interviews that we're seeking to complete. We're at about 125. So what I'm going to talk about today is our provisional results or provisional findings. We've also done about a dozen participatory workshops where these were workshops where we engage members of the community in conversations about the data systems, data-driven systems, and data collection processes that they encounter on an everyday basis. And that has helped us to design our interview protocol. And we've also done 3 reflective focus groups thus far, where in the ongoing analysis that we do of our interviews, we actually reflect back these themes with people that have participated in the research to see how these themes are resonating with them. If they are, why? If they're not, what is? And lastly, this is research that's funded by the Digital Trust Foundation, which is a foundation that was formed out of a Cyprus settlement involving Facebook. It was a civil suit. We are not connected to Facebook, and this is, the project is fiscally sponsored by New America, based in Washington, D.C. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this slide because you can't read it, but also I'd like to get into a profile of 5 themes that we've covered. But our research broadly is interested in 3 questions focused on 1, people's experiences and ways of making sense of data-driven systems and data collection. 2, how they understand, how marginalized communities understand these experiences with respect to their everyday needs, their basic needs. And 3, strategies that members of marginalized communities use to protect themselves, to protect their privacy, to preserve self-determination and their data rights. So again, I think, I'm hoping that you'll ask questions as we move into the Q&A. We're still in data collection mode, and we're also in the process of coding the interviews that we do have. And on the basis of that analysis, we have a number of themes that have arisen. I put up 5. We actually have 7 that are prominent. 1 has to do with insecurity or security and insecurity, and another has to do with predatory data collection. But I do want to talk about these 5 themes briefly by referencing the stories of people that we've been working with. So the 5 themes are: data sharing is a power relationship. 2, data integration is for their benefit, not ours. And there is sometimes vaguely referenced. 3, data profiles are not my story. 4, there are emotional and material costs of data collection processes and data-driven systems that we engage with. And 5, there's innovation, resistance, and self-defense strategies that take place in response to these processes and to these systems. So Amy Black is based in Los Angeles on Skid Row. And if you're not familiar with Skid Row, it's a place where there are lots of encampments, and typically unhoused individuals have to pack up their encampments every day. And a lot of people are in very precarious living situations. And Amy, in this case, is talking about this condition of pervasive surveillance when she's describing data sharing as a power relationship, and talking about engaging with the social welfare system. And she says, when you go to the Department of Public and Social Services office, they want to know all your information. If you own a house, if you own a car, if you own storage, if you own stocks, how much money do you got in the savings account, or do you have money under your bed? So Amy, like many other individuals that we've spoken to in our research, feels this constant form of questioning. 2 minutes. Okay, I'll go through 2 more, and then I'll get to my last point. How about that? So data integration for their benefit pertains to how individuals perceive data-driven systems as talking to one another. And this is another individual from Los Angeles talking about something called the coordinated entry system. For more information about coordinated entry system, you can read a wonderful book by my co-lead Virginia Eubanks called Automating Inequality. And this person says, once you enroll in the coordinated entry system, you're an open book. You being on that list stigmatizes you because it's open access. Even if you don't share your information with another agency, They just look you up in the computer. Okay, the third is data profiles, not my story. This is Kirsty, a formerly incarcerated woman living in Charlotte. Charlotte has a high rate of recidivism and is a predominantly African-American city. Kirsty is talking about having a criminal record and how that sticks with you and becomes a barrier as you're trying to re-enter into society. And she says, as soon as he, and this is the hiring agent, had seen my application and seen the record, i.e. the criminal record, he didn't ask me to talk about it. He didn't ask me to explain it. He didn't ask me, was it a mistake? He didn't ask anything. He was just like, oh, you have a record. Oh, well, we don't hire felons. Can I squeeze in one more? Okay, emotional and material costs. This is Angelica in LA, who lives in public housing, one of the oldest public housing units in the United States, talking about reporting requirements that go with being eligible for public housing. And she says, I feel like we're being watched. Here we have to report if a mom or dad comes to visit. We need to report to housing that to housing all the time. If we don't share the information, there's a chance that they can evict us. So there are real consequences to sharing information that, again, pertain to the ability of members of marginalized communities to really meet their basic needs, to fulfill their human rights. I just want to say really quickly, though I've given you 4 examples of how things are not so rosy, I will just say really quickly that in the interviews that we do, first of all, it's really important to understand that people are not delineating between their online and offline worlds often, and I think that may be a distinction from what I've heard thus far. It's all integrated, right? All of these injustices, social, economic, and racial injustices, are integrated in such a way that it becomes really difficult to tease out. The reason why I mention that is because when people are talking about the strategies and the solutions that they practice, or the visions that they'd like to see enacted, they talk about envisioning a world that's based in social justice, in material abundance, and open and free communication, right? They're not per se talking about data protection, though people do articulate frustration with pervasive surveillance on the one hand, and an interest in having their privacy protected. That's not necessarily absent from the conversation, but they're trying to advocate for a type of world that is more broadly just. So when we think about what our data bodies is in our project, we're struggling with this tension to be able to articulate, on the one hand, this form of pervasive everyday surveillance that's often tied in with everyday racism, on the one hand, and thinking about that affirmative sense of self that reflects the type of world that members of marginalized communities want to live in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Seeta. And I'll give the floor to Stefania. You have a lot of experience with data activism,
So thank you very much, Gloria and Rocco, for organizing it, and also for finding me yesterday around on the fly and engaging me in a very interesting conversation. I would have been on the other side otherwise. Now I'm sitting here, but well, I see what I can contribute. And I've known Valentina, who should have been actually in this chair today, for a long time, and I know that these are very big shoes to fill. So what I promised to do is to provide a small commentary, a sort of wrap up, maybe enlarging, maybe broaden a little bit the scope of what we're discussing at this table. And the perspective I come from, in order, to, when I approach all of this is, as Rocco mentioned, that what we call in Amsterdam data activism. So we're trying to see how our subjectivities, but also citizen agency, co-constituted, reconstituted in interaction with algorithmic forms of power, in interaction with massive data collection, surveillance, or if you want, even broader, datification, with a specific focus on the perspective of the people, citizens, although we also spend a lot of time with a particular subset of very skilled, tech-savvy citizens, like, for example, developers. So my comments are informed by that empirical research that I do with my group, which is called Data Active at the University of Amsterdam. So I would like just to, as I said, to broaden up a little bit the scope of the conversation, and also show you something that I think belongs to this conversation, but comes from another side of the world, and unfortunately the women and the weight are not in the room. Actually, you see it there. I would like to talk about three problems, if you want, dimensions or extra inputs. And the first one actually touches upon what Seeta just mentioned, the fact that discrimination is never alone, never comes by itself. So there's gender discrimination, but usually this maps onto other existing forms of discrimination, such as, for example, precarity in the labor market, of race, of access to education, and so on. So when we discuss, for example, apps that are designed to empower us as women, we should really ask ourselves, get broaden the picture and ask how the gender dimension intersects other dimensions associated with discrimination. And I would like to show you a project that you might know. Actually, I just noticed, Peter, that there is also the English version. If you click at the very top on the corner, you can click on English. I knew the original Portuguese, but now probably more people can read it. And the graphics are quite telling. And so what this group did, so it's a group called Coding Rights. It's an NGO, or better as they define themselves, it's a women-led think and do tank that, as their slogan goes, tries to translate human rights into code. If you don't know them, I strongly advise you to take a look. Coding Rights has done a project on, among other things, how menstrual tracking application are interacting with their users, and what does this mean. To be sure, they've done more. So they've also looked at data flows in cities and other dimension of human activities. But I would like to talk about this one in particular. So what they say, and I just read one excerpt from one of their interviews. You're going to understand what this refers to. So this is a woman who uses these apps, and she said, my freelancer's dream, so this is someone who has probably, she's maybe, I don't know what she does, but she's a freelancer, so her income is fluctuating, probably. And what she says is, my freelancer's dream is for money to show up in my bank account with the same regularity as my period, every 28 days or so. Menstruation is important work for the world. Now that they have figured out how it can make money, it would be great if that money ended up in the hands of the people who actually ovulate and bleed. So the entire project is informed by this type of ambition to look at how this intersects with other dimensions. But we already heard a lot of that, so I leave it at that. And then the second dimension that coming from studying activism is very important in my mind, but it also touches upon what Anna mentioned earlier, is the notion of empowerment. So who is ultimately empowered in all of this, but really empowered? And this touches again on other three dimensions, if you want. And I go back to what the Coding Rights says. So their project, which the menstrual application study is part of, is called Chupa Data Sucker. So they're looking at a variety of infrastructures, not only apps that take data from us. And they're opening little stories like, we love our technological devices, but we have enough evidence that we are now in an abusive relationship with them. We even suspect they might be possessed by Chupa the data sucker. So this is, the narrative introduction. But I think the use of the word these two little words, abusive relation, speaks to something that many women unfortunately experience in their daily life. So the question is, to what extent can we create a relation with our technological tools which is not abusive? The second dimension, as part of the empowerment, is the issue of delegation to technology. What basically a lot of these apps do is someone that knows better than I do right? So you imagine, especially if you are relatively young and still unfamiliar with what happens to your body, a number of people actually tell you what should happen. But it's not just when it comes to your body. As women, as young girls, we have told since childhood that someone else always knows better, whether it is the parents, but whether it is your older brother or your male friends. There's always this kind of gendered discussion on someone who knows it better. So when we think about empowerment, I think it's very important to think about this dimension of delegation. Who knows better, and on what ground does we decide how and when knowledge is produced? And then the third aspect that's also related to the user relation dimension, the delegation to technologies, the homogenization of what's good, what's normal, what's correct, what should happen. So as we know very well, especially women know, the menstrual cycle is a very personal thing. We're all very different, in fact. I mean, literature tells you, medical literature in particular, that it should happen with a certain, amount of weeks. But, what is normal, what is typical, what is healthy, it's actually ultimately very personal. And whereas I very much value what Grégoire shared with us, I mean, there are some patterns there, and it's very nice, and especially when, we don't get much sexual education from other channels, to get informed, so proper information, scientific information through, for example, and how one might also get the impression that I'm not actually right, I'm not, normal, I'm not typical, I'm not healthy. And, you should have some examples of how, in fact, that happened and that corresponded to an actual health issue. And that's, one way in which technology certainly can empower us. But there can also be, the sort of counter message that, it is ultimately disempowering. Because if I'm not normal, that I should, I should do something to correct that, but there's not much actually you can do to correct it. The frequency of your menstrual cycle, for example. And I think about the impact this might have, especially on younger girls. And then the third dimension that I would like to maybe offer to the discussion is, how can we understand our relation with technologies? What can we learn, for example, for feminist studies, feminist research, especially when it comes to, for example, feminist STS, science technology studies of, research that looks at the relation between technology and humans. What can we learn from there, or, to illuminate the way we should relate to technology, understand better, or even, imagine different, more empowering relations with our technology. And I'm thinking about something that comes from a different line of thought, if you want. It comes from, more of philosophy, but it's now being repurposed also to think about methods and, for example, data ethics. And it is the ethics of care. So it's something you might be familiar with that. So I'm not gonna also don't have time to do that. But the ethics of care. I use it a lot when I teach, for example, data ethics, and when I try to think and imagine the relation between myself as a researcher and the data subject, the people that participate in my studies. So it's, a way of thinking, regulating the relation between researchers and research subjects. But, it's ethics grounded in voice and relationship. It's a very situated ethics. It's not universal. It's not an ethics it's an ethics of engagement in a way. Now, we know that technology is actually there to standardize, and it's one product that fits a lot of people, fits all in a way. But what can we learn if you go back to those foundational readings on the ethics of care? Can it help actually to reimagine more empowering ways of relating with technologies? This is a big question. I don't actually have an answer, but I would like to offer it for further reflection. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefania, for your inputs. And I now would like to open the floor. Please. I suggest you stand up and you speak up because of the there's even a microphone. Wow.
No, for me. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I am very special to have a microphone now and to address the speakers. I actually would like to go to back to the first presentation. It was a very interesting application. I don't have it. But it would be interesting to hear what are the data protection default settings in your app. Can you hear me? No?
Closer.
Closer.
Okay. So I wanted to hear about the data protection by default settings in the app that you presented. Maybe you could elaborate also about data protection by design solution that you found to your app.
Yeah, we should take a couple of questions and.
Okay. Hi, my name is Anna. I'm from the Law Society. In my previous life, I was working for an urban lobby, and I was working on quite a lot of poverty programs, urban regeneration programs. And my question is predominantly to Seeta and her research. Have you considered spatial or space as one of the factors in discrimination and one of the factors that can actually deepen the discrimination and marginalization? This was one of our core arguments in my previous job, that actually poverty, discrimination, gender discrimination, all sorts of things correlate strongly with space, especially in cities. And I'm wondering if this was a factor in your research, or are you familiar with research that will touch upon these subjects? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll take a third and a fourth question. Please. You already have the microphone.
Okay. So thank you. I had some curiosity as the first one, and specifically who accesses all the data about, for instance, the sexual activity and all the health data, and for which purposes are there secondary uses. And then in the last slide you mentioned gender inclusivity or something like that, but then to make an example you talked about sexual orientation and sexual preferences, you said. So I was confused. What did you mean exactly? What are you doing about gender inclusivity? And I'm not using your app as well. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I work for a Silicon Valley company, and we have obviously a significant heterosexual white male-dominated workforce. And one of the things I do is I'm part of the LGBTQ plus affinity group, and we're trying to, in addition to promote a more diverse workforce, and gender and sexual orientation and stuff, we also think it's our role to try to create empathy within the organization, within the heterosexual white male workforce, to understand how the analytics, how the data that they're working on and building actually affect people. And we're struggling with exactly how to do that effectively. So I was interested if any of you had thoughts on effective ways to create empathy within an organization so that they are being more inclusive and thinking more about how what they're doing affects people.
Okay, we'll have a first round of replies, and we will have several rounds, so don't worry.
So just quickly on data protection by default and by design. So I'd say by default the first thing we do is that we provide information as clear as possible in our privacy policy. So the privacy policy has really been designed to make sure that all the basic elements and information that we want to give to our users is there, let's say, at the beginning, so that usually people we know they don't really read this, but we want, for those who make an effort, to have the right information right at the beginning, and we try to make it as simple and understandable for everyone as possible. Another thing on data protection by default is that many other competitors, for example, they have what we call like an out-of-box questionnaire, where they ask you a lot of information about yourself. The questions that we are asking with Clue are very simple. We ask the length of your period, we ask the length of your cycle, and then we ask your age. After that, the tracking categories are minimal. So if you want to track more, we explain you why you can track. So everything that you track, there is a nice encyclopedia article that is linked to it so that you understand why you are doing this. But we don't force you to track the 30 categories from the start. You actually track the basic categories that helps you give you basic insights into your health. So we are trying to be as minimal as possible in our data collection, and if people want to know more, then we have the information for them. For now, the people who access our data is just Clue, so our data scientists and researcher, and then after, all the data, when we share it with university, is anonymized before we send it to them, so it can't be tracked back to any individual users.
Thank you very much. Seeta?
See if I can try and, excuse me, answer your question and actually the last question somewhat together. So space is an important consideration, though I don't think, well, none of us comes from an urban planning, geography, critical geography background. But in each of the 3 cities, there are incredible pressures on low-income communities to move out of the cities, right? There's a process of gentrification that's taking place in Skid Row. That is, interestingly, I mean, it's coupled with all sorts of things, but mainly that's prime real estate, and downtown LA can be redeveloped in ways that, would be really profitable for a small amount of people. In Charlotte, it's a Google Fiber city and a top banking city. And so there's also a process of kind of moving people out of different neighborhoods that are historically African American. And then in Detroit, post-industrial collapse, a city that is quote unquote rebuilding itself, but with 40,000 people in Detroit have had their water or utilities turned off, right? And so it's been a generation since the riots or the rebellion of the 1960s to this day, thinking about how the composition of the city is changing, how the fabric of the city is changing, and how that intersects with other forms of discrimination and injustice. In terms of the question about empathy, sometime, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, someone from a big company contacted our project saying like, oh, we want to find out about your research, and we've heard it's really fascinating and you're in on the ground and blah, blah, blah. And so I started asking more questions, and it turned out that none of the people that were on the call was a researcher. They were the public policy team. So, they were there to try, and there was a product developer. So basically they were there to try and partner or encourage this project to partner with them because they had an important product to launch at the beginning of this year. I would say that's the opposite of developing empathy around these issues. What is interesting to think about is how do you actually hold a conversation between members of a community who have seen their neighborhoods torn apart by pressures of the tech industry trying to move in, let alone other kinds of issues. How do you actually hold that conversation? And I haven't seen it done yet. I think that at the end of the day, with our research, we actually hope to use some of the material to do that kind of engagement. But I think it's really difficult, but really wanting.
Okay, one more from Anna about empathy?
Yeah, sure. So a different angle on empathy. So I think it's important for us all to be aware of our positionality and our privilege that strikes against us, and to always acknowledge that data politics are not neutral. So this is on a technological sense, but also socioculturally. So everything from collection and design to publication should acknowledge the gender dynamics. And that's key, and we're not doing that enough in these spaces, because in my world, it's always like the women do the women work, the women research, the women policy. Like, how do we move beyond that and make sure there's like top level, top senior management buy-in from different institutions, from a local to a national to a global level, so you have vertical and horizontal integration of the concept of gender and beyond, which we haven't even addressed in this conference yet, or in this session. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I would like to take all the remaining questions. There were at least 3, please.
I'll quickly start. Thank you so much for the panel. I thought this was fascinating and really, really thought-provoking. And really important contributions. My question has to do with whether or not, either in the context of the GDPR or in other kinds of cultural, political efforts, there's any work to try and bring in concerns around cyberstalking as a kind of way of framing vulnerability in bodies, especially since, obviously women statistically are 1 in every 6 women experience some form of cyberstalking. Obviously there's lots of, again, a connection between offline and online. There's a case right now that's gotten quite a bit of prominent attention in the UK just now because it was it involved the Tinder platform, but of course there's always all versions of online platforms. And I wonder too whether or not there's any work that's being done around women's shelters and the politics of obfuscation that could be involved in terms of thinking about data protection and rights.
Thank you very much. Next question.
Hi, my name is Soumya. I am a master's student at Leiden University. My question is actually for Clue and very short specific questions. Out of curiosity, when there was a similar question about access to data, my question is Clue a free app? And if not, how does Clue run? Because I'm assuming you're saying that only Clue people have access to our data and every other university or research institute only gets anonymized data. So I want to know what is Clue's business model? Second,
Clue is VC funded.
One second. Let's finish the question.
Second, do you collect prior health data? Because that can affect someone's judgment about whether your cycle is typical or whether you're healthy.
And I think that there was a third hand, but yes, very short search.
Very short. No, I have been thinking when you evoked the ethics of care. Ethics of care indeed do touch far beyond the individual. So the issue we are dealing with today from the perspectives of data protection actually may offer a far too limited perspective. Because anonymizing data doesn't solve any problem if the idea is to develop a new form of community, a new form of ethics of care.
Thank you very much. The panel will finish soon, but I will suggest that we stay for the last round of replies, and if you want to leave, please do it silently. Thank you. Please.
So, very quickly. So, Clue is VC funded, and right now we are free. But we are building premium features that will be paid by our users, so which go more in the direction of health. No, there is no advertising. And we don't sell data.
No, I would just like to thank you for broadening the issue. As I said, I just wanted to throw it there. But several of us have a problem of, especially if you look at community dimensions, activism and all of that, about, the overemphasis on individual responsibility and the data subject as a merely individual subject. So we need probably more research and much more interaction with communities to properly explore that.
Just really quickly, and this maybe addresses the first question slightly as well as the last one. There's a project that is actually affiliated with the Detroit Community Technology Project, where my co-lead Tawana Petty works, called, I think it's called Meaningful Consent. And so it's thinking beyond just legal data protection to how does a community engage in a process where it can actually be collectively involved in determining appropriate uses of data. And this is in the context of constructing community technology infrastructure that involves setting community norms and so on and so forth.
Thank you very much to all the speakers for all the questions. About the question about the women's shelter, there are some reflections. I've heard also there was a project that was very interesting about people in an illegal situation and how can you access them if you want to go to have communication. It was a lot of innovative ideas to protect anonymity using, for instance, collective email addresses. So there are some initiatives, grassroots initiatives. But thank you very much for everybody. I think it was very, very, very interesting. It was very interesting for me. Thank you for being here. And I hope to see you all next year in a very